Jacques Reda is, to my mind, France's greatest living poet. One of its greatest poets of all time. His work is not well known to English audiences because only a tiny fraction of his work has ever been translated. He is still alive in his mid-80s, and he was originally, and I think continued for many years, trying jazz criticism, but he became the editor of France's leading literary magazine. I think it was the Nouvelle Revue Française, and as well as editing it, he physically distributed it to booksellers, and he did this on the back of a motorised bicycle. And while he was distributing the magazine, as well as writing poetry, he wrote, to me, one of the most interesting books I've ever read, which is called Les Ruines de Paris, which was translated in English as The Ruins of Paris, and has been in print in English and French for a number of years. It would seem at first sight to be some kind of travel diary, but this is to hugely misrepresent massive poetic writing. It is, I think, basically an enormous series of prose poems. Prose poems have never really been successful in English. I don't know anyone who has written any successfully. I've tried on a number of occasions and I don't think I've ever succeeded. I might have done in one attempt, but I'll have to review that and think about it. But certainly Reda's success is undisputed. Rather than actually describe it in my own words, I will actually quote from the Flyleaf, because I suspect Mark Traherne, who translated it, wrote this, and I certainly couldn't equal it. From Belleville to Passy, from Montmartre to La Butte aux Cailles, from Antony to Saint-Ouen, Jacques Reda is a traveller in his own city of Paris. In the tradition of Baudelaire and Rimbaud, he is a nervous, rather unleisurely flaneur, unsettling and subverting preconceived ideas about travel and home. The Ruins of Paris echoes with the footsteps and the words of a wanderer by turns gloomy, curious, troubled, elated, angry, tender and confused, and sometimes all these things at once. We are led through the arrondissements and suburbs of Paris and beyond, in a journey that moves to the rhythm of walking, of trains, of the hopeful tempo of upbeat jazz. Reda the Wanderer is forever on the move. He constantly sets off, stops, begins afresh, always searching for questions that can't be answered. Over the last few years, I've read the book in English and French a number of times. Reda's prose, unfortunately, is no easier than his poetry. I will show you a double page of the French version with my notes and attempts to translate it, even with a bilingual translation in front of me. And you can see this was a lot of work which got me precisely nowhere, I think. Reda also has a marvellous talent for watercolours. He illustrates the covers of his books with these exquisite watercolours, which remind me of Réal Dufy. The book is basically impossible to forget. I will read it, parts of it, all of it, and after a month or two come back to it. Reda's Paris is not the Paris of the Eiffel Tower. It is not the Paris of the tourist. It is not even the Paris of a marvellous book called Dictionnaire des Monuments du Paris by Reda. Once, many years ago, I spent 2 or 3 weeks in Paris, not at one go, but in brief visits. And had my life been different, I think I would have spent much of it in Paris. But this is not the way life turned out. And so instead, I have to explore Paris through the visionary lens of Jacques Reda. I'll read the opening of the book in English and then the equivalent part in French. The stealthy footsteps of the heretic. In winter, around 6 o'clock, I need no coaxing to walk down the left side of the avenue through the public gardens, and I stumble into benches and small bushes because my gaze is utterly absorbed by a sky as incomprehensible as the approach of love. Its almost faded colour is not definable. A really dark turquoise, perhaps, the deep condensation of a light that eludes the eye and becomes the icy fire of the soul it invades. Noiseless convoys of clouds scurry noiselessly across lakes. Lightning would be less of a shock than this explosion of unending silence. This to me is pure poetry, poésie pure, which has been always an ideal of French poetry. It is very much anathema to the English-speaking world. The idea of the ivory tower, the idea of a perfect poetic world where colours are created, mix as on an artist palette, are transferred to a canvas, and the canvas becomes a great work of art. This is not how English people feel about art or nature or anything else, and this is perhaps why Reda is still so little known. I'll read the same passage now in Reda's original. Vers 6 heures, l'hiver, volontiers je descends l'avenue à gauche, par les jardins, et je me cogne à des chaises, à des petits buissons, parce qu'un ciel incompréhensible comme l'amour qui s'approche aspire tous mes yeux. Sa couleur, à peu près éteinte, n'est pas définissable. Un turquoise très sombre peut-être, l'intense condensation d'une lumière qui échappe au visible et devient le brûlant glacé de l'âme qu'elle envahit. Sur des lacs filent sans aucun bruit les convois de nuages sans aucun bruit. This is a marvellous example of prose poetry, and the whole 170 pages is absolutely and uniformly of the same quality. Reda has written about a dozen books of prose, and as none of them have been translated, then I cannot comment on them, but I do presume this is considered, probably correctly, his greatest work of prose. But still, he is essentially a poet. And on an earlier video, I recorded a small number of poems from his best collection, Return to Calm. And reading through the later parts of this book, I came across a particularly marvellous poem, La Lumière à Châtillon, The Light at Châtillon. Here it is essentially Reda walking, travelling by train, travelling on his motorised bicycle. I think here he's actually talking about a walk which isn't really possible to say. This is the English version by Aaron Prévost. There the small houses full of lost hours. Among orchards grown wild, the lilacs, and the sky cluttered with clouds that comes down low. Pale, from having worn away its blue against these expanses, and I advance in turn amid the drenched foliage, with its greens bright or tender but gone mad that mix and suddenly allow a glimpse of the strange perspective of Montmartre or Courbevoie, with their steep slopes as if they were rising sharply just after the palisade. So close, all of a sudden, you could place your fingers against a tower's crest, at the edge of an esplanade, in the ash that trembles blue and russet on the roofs. Here I am on the side of the true light that I had already discovered in the past as I slept. I recognise each path, each tree, each stone, but I see them for the first time. Astonishment lifts me from street to street. A hazy memory at the same time awakens. Here I lived. Through all life I'll live within gardens, rooms. Believe what I say, for it's the evening that talks and speaks true. The original, La Lumière à Châtillon. Ce sont les petites maisons pleines d'heures perdues entre les vergers devenus sauvages, les lilas et le ciel encombré de nuages qui descend bas, pâle d'avoir usé son bleu contre ces étendues, et j'avance à mon tour parmi les feuillages trempés. Dans les vins éclatants ou tendres, mes fous se mélangent et laissent entrevoir soudain la perspective étrange de Montmartre ou de Courbevoie, au versant escarpé, comme s'il se dressait tout juste après la palissade, si proche brusquement que l'on pourrait poser les doigts contre l'arête d'une tour au bord d'une esplanade. Dans la cendre qui tremble bleue et rousse sur les toits, me voici du côté de la véritable lumière que j'avais déjà découvert autrefois en dormant. Je reconnais chaque chemin, chaque arbre, chaque pierre, mais je les vois pour la première fois. L'étonnement me soulève de rue en rue. Une vague mémoire en même temps s'éveille. Ici j'ai vécu, je vivrai de toute vie au fond des jardins, des chambres. Il faut croire ce que je dis, car c'est le soir qui parle et qui dit vrai.